Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first Epic Fellow panel. I am Fyza.
And I'm Ellis. And we just have the utmost pleasure of introducing the CESTA Epic Fellows today, which we will start off with Daniella Graves, and then we'll move on to Lauren Movius, and we'll just let their work speak for itself. But it's just been a pleasure working with them, and we know you're really going to enjoy it. So after their presentations, we'll open it up to a short Q&A, and then we have our final three fellows. Thank you. Take it away, Daniella.
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Daniella Graves. I'm an associate professor of sociology at Ventura College, and my project is Culinary Crossroads, the evolution of Mexican food and its role in cultural identity. And I think it's actually a really nice, seamless transition from Dr. Parker's talk because this deals with intangible cultural heritage as well. So my hope is that this project will highlight how the presence of cultural food items worldwide today speaks to past global dynamics and maybe even imperial legacies. So for my project, I've created curricular materials for my Sociology of the Chicano Community course, in which I explore the socio-historical background of Mexican food and how the Mexican food that we're all so familiar with today, things like steak tacos or chicken enchiladas, didn't always exist in their current iteration. The Mexican food is a product of many different global influences, but my project will focus specifically on the interplay between indigenous foodways and Spanish colonization. So I've created two modules. The first module takes on a more macro level focus to studying Mexican food. So I look at Spanish conquest, the role of Spanish conquistadors, and how they used food as a tool of colonization. And here's a screenshot of that module. If anybody's interested in viewing these pages in more detail, I would be more than happy to share them with you. I spent a lot of time on them. But as a bird's eye view, I start with the overview page. This is where I have, a synopsis for the week, the themes that we'll cover, and there's the general expectations. And then I recorded a video lecture. So this is where I put together all of my research on the role of Mexican food during the time of Spanish colonization. And I was surprised to see there's quite a bit of research on food during Spanish colonization. I list the assigned reading for students and then some additional material and added resources, and then I end with graded deliverables. So in this case, it's a discussion and a written reflection. Module 2 takes on a more micro-level focus. So this is where I talk to students about their current experiences with food, their connection to food, their relationship to food, and how food can be a vehicle for identity formation, identity expression, and identity negotiation, especially when it comes to our ethnic ties. So the theoretical framework for these two modules centers C. Wright Mill's concept of the sociological imagination, which connects people's personal experiences to the broader social issues and historical contexts in which they find themselves. And this was particularly relevant for my project in the sense that as a class, we will be exploring students' relationship to food. In my Sociology of the Chicano Community class, we do emphasize Mexican food, but we also make space for students to talk about any other connections that they might have to food, and how that can be connected to things like social structures, institutions, socializing agents, so all social forces that have shaped and have in turn been shaped by foodways. So really my hope for this one is to provide students with a socio-historical lens with which they can view their current food preferences and practices. So to give you an idea of what I cover, Module 1 will start with an overview of what is typically accepted as today's conventional Mexican food. And so we start there to then work backwards to explore the historical dynamics that have led to those particular patterns of eating. And one of the dynamics that scholars like Linda Alvarez or Rebecca Earle write about is how noteworthy it was that the Spanish conquistadors introduced their Spanish foods as quickly as they did to the spaces that they were inhabiting and colonizing in Mexico. This was a unique characteristic of the Spanish conquistadors. They introduced their foods at a much faster rate than any other colonizing group, at least based on historical records. And so within a very quick span of time, they introduced a whole host of new food items that are now fully represented in Mexican food. For instance, they introduced livestock, which is used for beef and pork. They introduced chicken and other types of poultry, wheat and wine and dairy, different types of vegetables from what the indigenous populations were harvesting, so things like lettuce and cabbage, and even cooking oil. The whole concept of extracting fat from an animal or oil from food and then cooking a meal in that was not something that the indigenous populations did prior to Spanish contact. So in this module, students will see that during the time of Spanish colonization, they just completely expanded the scope of what was considered food. Another noteworthy dynamic was the labeling that took place regarding indigenous foodways. In her book, it was called Violent Appetites by Carla Savasso. Savasso writes about how the word disgusting was a word that was born out of a space of colonization, that it was a word that colonizers used whenever confronting indigenous foodways to label those foods as revolting or uncivilized, not necessarily because of the food's intrinsic qualities, but because they were unfamiliar to European tastes or cultural norms. And we saw this in Mexico in the ways in which the conquistadors reacted negatively to the indigenous populations who consumed smaller animals or cacti, or even root vegetables like sweet potatoes were considered dirty. And Savasso's whole point is that this was purposeful, that this labeling was part of a broader process of othering that was used to justify empire building. If you could label indigenous ways of life, including foodways, as fundamentally inferior, then you could more easily legitimize the appropriation of land and resources and the imposition of your own cultural norms and foods. So students will explore not only the impact of these rapid introduction of foods to Mexico, but also the attitudes and the perceptions that shaped those rapid introductions. And ethnic prejudice and racism did play a role, as we see a little bit with the labeling process, but so too did something called humoralism. And humoralism was the predominant medical framework for Spain at the time of the Spanish conquest. And they believed that the human body was made up of 4 elements, and that these 4 elements needed to be in balance with one another in order to maintain the vitality and the health of the individual. And they believed that things like dietary choices or social surrounding would have a direct impact on how your elements were balanced, so food and environment. They also believed that not only could you tell how well a person was based on how your elements were balanced, but who you were as a person. So your character as indicated by your physical state. So who you were believed to be as a person was an indicator of what you consumed. So a very direct take on you are what you eat. And so under this framework of humoralism, and this is a great book, by the way, by Rebecca Earle, The Body of the Conquistador. I recommend it. Under this framework of humoralism, the conquistadors noticed the difference, the physical differences between themselves and the indigenous populations. They noted that the indigenous peoples tended to be of shorter stature, that they had darker complexion, and that they lacked beards. And they viewed those differences not only through the lens of ethnic prejudice and racism, but also through the lens of humoralism. They believed that they looked different because they had a different elemental balance due to their different environments and different foods. And that alone fueled the conquistadors' fears of consuming indigenous foods. They believed that if they ate like the natives, they would become like the natives, culturally and physically. And there was an underlying understanding that that was not a desirable thing. And so they introduced their own foods. And I included a few quotes from my larger lecture. For the sake of time, I'm just going to highlight the second one. It's by a Spanish Dominican, Gregorio Garcia, who, like many Spaniards at the time, feared that living in Mexico would impede the growth of their cherished facial hair, the Spanish beard. But he believed, like many of them, that having access to better Spanish foods would help them avert that potential threat. So he lists some examples of these better foods. He lists lamb and chicken and turkey, beef, bread, wine. These are all foods that existed in Spain but had not existed in Mexico prior to Spanish contact. So we can really see that unfolding dichotomy of the superior, or what was socially constructed to be the superior Spanish foods, and the inferior indigenous foods. And also that humoral foundation of being able to overcome the limitations of one's environment through better foods. So my hope for this module is that students will see that food was not just a matter of keeping people alive or even preserving a nostalgic connection to their homeland, to Spain, but it was a critical part of their anxious pursuit to maintain their Spanish distinctness and their Spanish physiques. Module 2 brings it to more contemporary times. So for this module, under IRB approval, I interviewed students, I recorded them, and I uploaded them into Canvas Studio. I also transcribed a lot of them, but that's another story. We just talk about food and their connection to food and the role that food played in their personal and their collective identities. And future students will have an opportunity to analyze these, but I did see a few themes emerge just from transcribing and listening to all the interviews. The first theme is that food was a bridge to the past. So a lot of my students spoke vividly about how a certain meal reminded them of their childhood, or spending time with a loved one, or maybe certain celebrations that centered food. Like a lot of them spoke about tamales at Christmas. And they talked about how they hoped to recreate these memories using recipes that had been handed down to them. And what I found interesting is that the majority of them spoke about their grandmother's recipes specifically. So there was something unique about a grandmother's recipes and keeping her memory alive through food, which I loved. Then also a sense of community. Students spoke about how engaging in certain food traditions or practices allowed them to feel like they were part of something larger than themselves, like their culture. And many of them really enjoyed sharing that with other people. There was one of the students who I interviewed who told me that it didn't matter if it was her friends or her colleagues or her family. She really enjoyed making pancit for them on their birthday, a Filipino noodle dish, and that if they weren't already familiar, she would use it as an opportunity to share with them the symbolism of consuming these long noodles on your birthday and a long and prosperous life. So the role that it played in cultural heritage and identity. Other ways that it showed up for students is that it played a role in navigating their bicultural or biracial identities. It also helped shape their global and also their domestic travel experiences. And so many different ways it showed up in their social life, but unfortunately not everybody's experiences with food were positive. There were 2 students who shared with me that they learned as children that their cultural foods were ridiculed by other kids. And so this would cause them a lot of shame or embarrassment to the point that they no longer wanted to consume those foods in front of others or even talk about those foods. One of the students I interviewed said that he learned as a young Salvadorian immigrant child what the more acceptable food staples were, so things like pizza or hot dogs. And so whenever a teacher or anybody else would ask him, what's your favorite food in school, he would say hot dogs, even though he admitted to me that he very much disliked hot dogs. But he would so much rather say that than, risk the ridicule of sharing his cultural foods. So After reviewing these interviews, I'm reminded that this whole concept of you are what you eat didn't end with colonization. It still holds true today in many different ways. It tells a story of who we are and where we came from. It can shape our social experiences with other people and with our culture. And the part that I loved about food, mostly for this project, is that food is able to transcend geographic boundaries. So it serves as a reminder of our ever-evolving, interconnected global world. So that is all I have for you today. Thank you for allowing me to talk about my project. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniella. And for those of you that have questions for her, you'll have a chance to answer or to ask them in just a few minutes. But now let me introduce Lauren Movius.
Thank you. How the world communicates has been completely changed due to globalization. But how truly global is global media studies? Many textbooks focus on the economic elements of global media, specifically how Western countries dominate. But global media means more than the ability to, say, watch CNN or the BBC around the world. I have developed a class that exposes students to a much wider range of examples that are genuinely global. We take a closer look at the rise of Korean media, the increasing strength of India's Bollywood, the role of propaganda, and the relative decline in influence of US media in recent decades. Even my 3-year-old loves engaging with global media. Here he is enthusiastically watching some YouTube clips on an iPad, despite my best efforts to get him to watch some nice PBS cartoons. He loves these YouTube clips of adults playing with children's puzzles. And this past week, we watched some videos from Brazil, Australia, Japan, and Sweden. But back to the college level, for my project, one of my main goals during the fellowship has been to create curriculum that will help foster global understanding and to strengthen competencies of our community college students. So this past week, I asked my students to reflect on what they learned in our global media class and what most stood out to them from this past semester. And here are snippets from 3 students taken from their longer posts. The reflections shared by classmates on global issues led me to a deeper appreciation for the privileges and opportunities in my own life. I learned about how other countries function and how different their lifestyles are compared to mine. This information expanded my mind in regards to being grateful for where I live. It opened my eyes about other ways to live. And finally, this new outlook on life has made me more grateful for the sacrifices my parents have made to provide technology, housing, and education. I'm also grateful that we can freely communicate, unlike other countries we studied. So I have about 80 of these student reflections from this past semester, and certainly different themes and takeaways emerged. What stood out right away is that students value global learning. What also stood out was about this theme of personal reflection, how by learning about other cultures and global issues, students then had a different perspective and often a greater appreciation for their own lives. As we all know, through global learning, students should become informed, open-minded, and responsible people who are attentive to diversity across the spectrum of differences. This is one point from the American Association of Colleges and Universities value rubrics that was shared with EPIC Fellows during this past year. And I used this and some other rubrics to help me fundamentally rethink my own classes and how I can best support global learning among our students for this fellowship project. So for my EPIC project, I redesigned my course in Media and Communication Studies. This is Media 3 or Global Studies 3 called Global Media. And for the past few years, this has been an online asynchronous course on Canvas. So in redesigning this class, I kept in mind that it was online in terms of what assignments would work best for students in the online environment. For my broad goals, I wanted to create innovative curricular material. So not only thinking about what would work best for the online environment, but also what are some creative and new curriculum units that would really engage and excite students. Of course, I want our students to not only learn the material, but also to engage in deep learning and develop some of the skills that were listed on that last slide for the rubric, things like global self-awareness, perspective taking, and an understanding of cultural diversity. So this media studies class has always looked at international issues, but mainly from a Western perspective. As I mentioned earlier, many introductory textbooks focus on the economic elements of the global media industry, and specifically how Western countries really dominate that space. So in addition to the overall economic and ownership perspective, I wanted my class to also include cultural and political elements. And this includes more non-Western examples of media flows. Media flows looking at the role played by non-Western countries in both producing and then distributing media products at the global level. Specifically, I created 4 new modules: Introduction to Globalization, Mass Media, K-pop, and Propaganda. And I'll go through each of these modules briefly in a bit. For each module, I created an introductory video, a group discussion prompt, and another type of assignment. This other assignment was often based on a video, like a documentary, a short clip, or a video lecture. And for each module, I curated new resources, such as more diverse readings, articles, TED Talks, and library resources. And as you'll see, I use a lot of Stanford resources. So here's a screenshot of my Canvas homepage. For the first module, I created an introductory unit on globalization. And I developed a new reading list that introduces the general topic of globalization and adds a greater diversity of voices and viewpoints. A lot of the literature, as I mentioned, in global media and communication is from Western scholars, so I really wanted to diversify the readings, case studies, and thereby perspectives. I have created this introductory video. You see a clip of it here, just providing an overview of the topic and materials for students. And one assignment in this module that ties into economic globalization, as well as some of the negative aspects of globalization, the unevenness of globalization, is to have students watch a documentary about the International Monetary Fund and Jamaica called Life and Debt, and then respond to a series of discussion prompts. The next module, Introduction to Media Studies. So this course is open to all students, and I have a diverse range of students and interests and majors. And because there are no prerequisites or a required sequence of courses in my department, I can't assume that any of the students have already taken, say, Media 1, which is our general introduction to mass media, or have any experience with media and communication studies. So I have to introduce the general topic of what is mass media and communication studies before looking at the global media landscape. And here's a screenshot of that overview for this module with a brief introductory video. So to help students understand the current role that mass media plays both in their own lives and society, I asked them to reflect on these 2 broad questions. How does the presence of mass media affect your life? And how would your life be different without the mass media? These are actually really difficult questions. We live in a world where the media is ubiquitous. Therefore, it can be incredibly difficult to imagine our lives without the media. So in order to diffuse more international aspects into this module on mass media, and to help students reflect on these 2 broad questions, I created this assignment. I found this great short clip. It's less than 10 minutes from PBS Frontline. And it's about the country of Bhutan, which did not allow television until 1999. So this clip is from shortly thereafter. So it was one of the last countries in the world to allow television. And so it's this great snapshot to see a before and after the introduction of television. So students can really start to imagine, what would my life be like without the media? How does the media impact a society? Something that's very difficult to do when we grow up surrounded by the media. I might skip this assignment in the interest of time. For the third module on K-pop, here I relied heavily on Stanford resources. There's this excellent 45-minute lecture by a Stanford professor and accompanying materials from Spice. So here is a screenshot of my Canvas overview and one view of the video lecture. And I based both my group discussion and a written assignment on the content from the video lecture. And there are wonderful resources from Spice with extra materials, context, history, etc. So I also created an additional extra credit assignment from some nice graphs that were included with that material. And what I would like to do in the next few weeks is to finish curating some additional readings on the topic of K-pop, either to assign as required reading in future sessions or as just additional information. A lot of my students brought up K-pop in the past when we talked about contraflow or counterflow. So asking them to come up with examples of non-Western media that's distributed globally. So they're very interested in this topic, and I'm glad now I have a whole unit on it to provide more context and depth. The fourth unit I am just finishing up, so I will offer this to my students over the summer, and this module is about Japanese propaganda art. During our 2023 summer intensive meeting for EPIC Fellows, as many of us will recall, we had this really great tour at the Hoover Institute, and part of that was a display of propaganda. So immediately I began brainstorming how I could include some of those examples and access to primary resources for my students. So I was just thrilled to discover this rich resource from the Stanford Hoover Institute called Fanning the Flames, Propaganda in Modern Japan. And it has digital stories, videos, interactives, and digitized collections. And it gets even better. I then saw that Spice also had a whole curricular unit and lesson plans based on the collection at Hoover, so students can engage in a critical analysis of primary resources from that website. So here's a screenshot of a longer assignment where students can analyze a specific example of Japanese propaganda after they've already done a lot of readings on the history and context. So I can't wait to finish this up and get some student feedback. And in fact, there's so much fascinating material here that I'm going to create 2 modules from this material, one to set up the historical and social context, and then the second to analyze in more depth different specific pieces of propaganda more closely. So to conclude, we all want our students to engage with our course material at a deep level and to think about it beyond the classroom. A broad goal of this project was for students to gain critical thinking skills and a deeper understanding of different cultures and global issues, ultimately thereby helping them to become global citizens. So I was so proud of some of my students, some of whom took one of their assignments from our Global Media Studies course and submitted it to Santa Monica College's 15th Annual Global Citizenship Symposium. One of my students was a finalist here and presented their project about globalization to the wider SMC community at the symposium just a few weeks ago. So thank you for your time, and thank you to Stanford Global Studies, CESTA, Spice, and my EPIC Fellows who have been so supportive during this fellowship.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Well, now we'll open it up to a, I believe, let's see. Yeah, 15-minute Q&A. Excellent. Lots of time for questions. Questions for Daniella and Lauren.
I really enjoyed both presentations. Thank you very much. I was wondering, have you connected with the zero textbook cost grant funds in your own institution? Because it seems like either the curation of your material or maybe the new content that you developed might be eligible for some funding. And then also, have you considered sharing that on like the Academic Statewide Senate OER website? I think it's coolfored.org or something like that. I'm just saying, I think it would be really interesting interesting material for a lot of your colleagues statewide.
Thank you. Is this on? Yeah. Thank you. I have not connected, but I will. I will be connecting with my college, and I would be more than happy to share the material. I think I really enjoyed putting it together, so if it can help anybody else, I would be happy to.
And at Santa Monica College, there's currently a grant I just applied for OER, so I'm going to be changing a lot of that material, and I think it's important and nice to share the information with a broader community. Thank you.
Thank you. I loved both of those presentations. And thinking of Daniella, and I'm thinking of some conversations on our campus around the disappearance of Area E for the CSUs and the challenges that that is providing to our nutrition and health teachers. And it just seems like a really interesting potential collaboration for a learning community or something like that to get students taking both those courses. So I just wanted to suggest that.
Yeah, I would love that. So we can chat afterwards. I'll give you my email.
Yeah, I'll get you in touch with the person at our college.
That would be great.
Great work. Danielle, I wanted to ask if maybe, since you talked about the connection between like the word disgusting, if you've looked at some other sociolinguistic aspects and maybe potentially doing a unit on language and food surrounding it and thinking about resilience as well, right? Because the food changed, but then you also see some aspects in Spanish like me in Chile, right? So it's like combining that like Chile is originally from Mexico, and by saying that, you're kind of like saying like, I'm spiced out. Like, yeah. I can't really translate that very well in English, but there's like lots of other examples I can think of in terms of like when you're asking if salsa in Spanish is too spicy, you say like, does it stab? So I'm wondering if you could think about what you think about that.
Yeah, I don't spend as much time on like the sociolinguistic aspect of sociology, but I'm intrigued by it. I think words are not neutral. Words are political. Words mean a lot about the socio-historical, socio-cultural, socio-political backgrounds in which they find themselves. I do spend some time talking about labeling theory, so the words that we use and how we choose to label certain foods, certain actions. That's a great idea. I think I'll follow that rabbit hole and see a little bit more about the social construction of language and how we use it to communicate meanings. Also, food taboos, right? So the word disgusting is very ethnocentric and Eurocentric, and the fact that it was constructed out of a space of colonization means that you're expanding this notion of what disgusting is and who you should be disgusted by. Power dynamics and political actions there. But no, thank you for the suggestion.
Oh, I got the next mic. She gave it to me early. Daniella, when I was traveling in Mexico, I accidentally stumbled across a source that really kind of blew my mind about the Islamic and Middle Eastern influences in Spanish cuisine, which of course then instantly makes massive historical sense. Yes. On the Iberian Peninsula. And I wonder if that's part of it. I mean, I think it's some cilantro, cumin, cloves. You can go on. The prefix al, as in algebra and Al Jazeera. So is that something that you cover in the course? Because I think it would really broaden the context for a number of students as well.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. So I do cover that. A lot of the words in Spanish have an Islamic foundation, like azúcar, sugar. But even tacos al pastor is Islamic, and it comes from its Middle Eastern roots. And also there are a lot of other global influences. Conchas, pan dulce, which is sweet bread in Mexico, has foundations in French brioche. It's the same dough that is used for French bread. And it came about during some pastry wars that we had in Mexico that people don't really include in their history lessons. And beer and the German influence of beer in the dairy industry as well. Thank you.
I just wanted to follow up with the comment about sociolinguistics, and I just think it's so fascinating that that's something that you can see across many different cultures and histories, and there's so much to a name, whether it's an individual name, there's so much history behind that, but also food names, right? Because I think of the Vietnamese being colonized by the French, and there's this multicultural mashup when you're talking about like café soda. Café is like a French word, but then soda is the Vietnamese portion that they added. And I think that there's definitely a lot of room there in terms of that exploration, in terms of just a module or unit that can be so fascinating and interesting and engaging for students. So I would love for you to share that portion once you develop it.
Thank you.
I have a question for both of you, and thank you for your presentations. They were really great. This is coming from a faculty member as well as a director for study abroad programs. And kind of coming out of the pandemic era, we were running a lot of virtual study abroad programs, and your courses I helped kind of facilitate and promote virtual study abroad, in which we ran courses that were very similar to yours. And I'm wondering, Lauren, I saw that you actually have led programs in London. Have you thought about approaching your study abroad office, or considered maybe doing a virtual study abroad course on your campus as an opportunity for students who aren't able to study abroad, or as an opportunity for community members that might be interested in that?
Thank you for that question and suggestion. I have not explored virtual study abroad, and I'm not very familiar with it, so I'd love to talk to you and hear how that functioned and how students enjoyed that. I am part of our global citizenship committee on campus, which is part of study abroad. So we oversee the applications for that, and we're always in discussions about, the applications that we get, but then what's going to be most accessible to students. Of course, our students are very price conscious, so some programs don't make, and we have to scrap them. So that is now our primary consideration when selecting study abroad programs. What's going to be the price, because we want it to be as accessible to as many students as possible. We've also thought about, in-country trips, but I'd love to explore that idea more, and I'm going to take that back to my committee at next week's meeting. Thank you.
Both of you did an amazing job, but my question's for Lauren. Lauren, did you explore, this is sort of obviously antithetical to democracy, but looking at state-sponsored media, especially when you're looking at China, Russia, Iran, for example. So I was just curious whether that was incorporated in your modules, and if not, that would be something wonderful and fascinating, I think, for our students to take a look at.
Yes, it's so fascinating, and I love to preface it by telling our students, except for our students who are studying abroad, it's very easy to take for granted our ability to, engage in speech, to criticize the government, to criticize whatever. So yeah, I do have a whole unit on different theories of the press, where we look at the 4 different models of press freedom and look at a number of different countries. That's kind of a broad overview, so I have thought about going into more depth, because students do find that very interesting. One thing I'm always thinking about with this course is, the breadth versus depth. It's a lower level introductory course, but I do find that students are very engaged with that topic, especially state-controlled media, and suppression of speech, and are often quite shocked with many of the examples and case studies and readings about what happens in other countries. I think one of my students' comments mentioned that, they had this newfound appreciation for what they, speech they could engage in the US after looking at some other places. And in addition to state-sponsored media, we also look at the role that social media can play in circumventing sometimes that state-controlled media. One great documentary is from the BBC called How Facebook Changed the World, looking at the role of social media in the Arab Spring and protests, and how protesters were able to circumvent state-controlled media and media shutdowns using social media. So thank you, and that's always on my mind to go into that topic more.
Thank you. I just wanted to give a translation about somebody said me in Chile, and that is I got screwed. I think translates to, and the other I think about Islamic influences. The Arabs were in Spain for 500 years, so we have a lot of words from Arab words in Spanish, aguja, nido, almohada, pelo, and I just wanted to give that background.
That's true, actually, and the incorporation of pork in Mexican cuisine dates back to the Moorish occupation in Spain and attempting to isolate this population of people because they were not able to consume pork.
Thank you. First of all, I just want to say, wow. I mean, so many things are sparking in my head. I teach global studies at Irvine Valley College, and I'm always trying to look at more interdisciplinary approaches to the topic, and so your presentations have been really helpful. And what it sparked me in thinking is, rather than me trying to encapsulate everything that you've shared, I'm wondering if there's any opportunity for either EPIC or I'm not sure how, for like virtual guest speaker ways, maybe if there could be like a recording, 10 to 15-minute recordings that we could incorporate into our classes and modules that maybe have, assignments that you've already done that are linked to an assignment that we can then incorporate, because I think it would open up pathways to your courses, but also broaden the horizons of our students. I come from a political background and an economic background, so my focus tends to be more in that dimension, although I cover cultural globalization as well, but not as well as you guys have. And so I'm just wondering if there's opportunities either via EPIC or I'm not sure how, but I think it would be so valuable for our students to really have access and exposure to the in-depth work that you guys have done, and it's really been incredible.
I'm not sure if there's anything through EPIC, but I would be happy to share any material. I did record a lecture, so if you'd like to connect, I would be happy to share that with you.
Same, I don't have a good answer for how best to do that, but I would love to collaborate and share material. Thank you.
Yeah, we do have a project called Epic Connect that is supposed to do that, and we're happy to tell you more during the break. I think we have time for one more question.
Yeah, I think there's a question over here.
Thank you. It's less of a question and more of a comment on Lauren's class. I really appreciate the fact that you've incorporated students' reflections on how mass media affects their lives after discussing the generalities of mass media and so on, but before moving into how mass media affect other cultures. I was born and raised in Poland and exposed to propaganda TV in my childhood all the time. And luckily I had parents who were able to discuss with us the propaganda aspects of the mass media that we were exposed to. But I was able to reflect before I left for the West, and then I was able to also understand the Western influence of mass media on our lives. So I'm really impressed with the fact that you are asking the students to reflect in the middle of the program before moving into the global aspect of it, and how other cultures consume and use mass media for their own growth. Thank you. Really appreciate that.
Thank you for that comment and sharing your own personal reflections on media that you had growing up.
Excellent. Well, I think that concludes our Q&A for our first two speakers. So let's give them another round of applause.
All right. Next up, we have Kevin Sherman.
Hello, everyone. Mine's less of a presentation, more of an ask. And you're seeing here the cinematic history of underrepresented people. What does that mean? The thing for me, as an educator, is to think about teaching film history. I come from a film history background, in a way that includes everyone, obviously. But how do we do that? So we have textbooks that don't have any kind of inclusion, right? Maybe 2 pages on Africa, 16 pages on Asia, in 800-page book, right? But then the thing is about access, right? So how do we have clips, examples, all these other things to give the students, to give to other educators, right? Well, I have created this database. It's in Canvas. It is completely accessible, ADA compliant. I have a team of people who are writing, native speakers who are writing subtitles or captions for everything. And it's not just a film studies database. It is for everyone, right? Women's studies, language programs, everything. And so the interesting thing about this database is that it's not me, it's everybody. So it's a collaborative thing. I have access to a team of probably about 1,000 people across the world. I won't get into how I have access to these archives and all these things, but I've been a part of it for 20 years, and we all are working together on the underground. I have access to stuff that if it screens on television, in Argentina in 1987, probably somebody got it, and then somebody can caption it. So it's a really, really rich archive. So how do we start thinking about getting these things into our coursework? I'm at City College of San Francisco. I teach almost exclusively online. And I think that's where we're moving toward, right? So how do we think about things like accessibility? How do we screen films? How do we include films? How do we get all of this stuff to our students in a way that is going to be easy? So the whole point of this is that you don't even have to have an account with Canvas Studio. I've made all of the links totally public, so you can download all of the clips. You can take whatever you want from the pages, but the whole point of it is collaboration. I don't know everything about every film in the world, right? So I need experts to collaborate with. Say, look, I'm interested in this film. I can't get it. Do you have it? Yeah, I have it. Tell me what you want. So we think about the film history canon, right? These are the major people, right? But I think it's important not just to say, well, we need more, but also think about historiography. How's history written? So it's not just about excluding, the Lumiere or demonizing the Lumiere brothers. They're hugely important. But it's like, how do you get beyond the program in 1895, in Paris? Well, Alce Guy Blanchet, right? The first recognized female filmmaker. The film history books don't even recognize her. She was not even recognized in France for years until, even despite the efforts of Leon Gamont, who was her collaborator, they wouldn't recognize her, right? So how do we get that back into the curriculum? Well, the books that we teach aren't going to do it. So how do we do that? And then we get to D.W. Griffith. I would make the argument that Lois Weber, a female American, a contemporary of Alce Guy Blanchet, was innovative just as much as Griffith was in some ways. She's totally erased from the history books. How do we get her back in the curriculum? And it's also a question of historiography because it's also about Alfred Hitchcock, right? Who's, the master of form. But we only talk about 5 films. How many films do you make, right? What about the stuff, in 1927, 28, 29, like stuff like Blackmail, right? That is actually a really great example in thinking about the transition of sound from, the silent era to the sound era. And it's really about people just don't have the resources, right? So I'm gonna take this book, I'm going to teach this book, I'm going to put whatever is in the book. We have to get outside of that and say, okay, let's get some options. So even though this is the canon, even within the canon, there's stuff that can be improved upon. So this is the book, and this is the latest edition of it that I grew up on when I was an undergrad. And this is a book, unfortunately, Gerald Mass has passed away and Bruce Cameron's retired, but they're not repressing this book anymore. I mean, it's not going to go into any other editions. And this was besides the book I'll talk about next, one of the major film history books. This book has, I think, 18 pages on Asia, 2 pages on Africa. 800 pages. This is the book's been taught since film studies inception in the 1970s when it broke away from English departments to legitimize its, through things like feminist theory, queer theory, and this book, and they're still pressing this book. And I remember talking to the publisher and saying, "Are there ever going to be another edition?" No, it just keeps on going. So it's like, well, I've already built a curriculum around this book. I'll just keep going. It's like, but it's a whole continent, 2 pages. What are you doing? So then we get into this whole idea of auteurism, right? So, and this is what these kinds of books promote. Hey, don't get me wrong. Sayed Ray and Ousmane Sembène are 2 of the masters of cinema, But how can 2 people be responsible for such large regions, right? So when we talk about Africa, we talk about Senegal. That's it. Nothing else. Of course, Nigeria in modern times, Nollywood. But in terms of the film history curriculum, this is all we get. India, the most populous region in the country, in the world. That's it. So we have, of course, we have Bollywood, right? But it's not taught in the film studies curriculum, right? And then we have this book, which I think is an amazing book in terms of diversity and inclusion. Unfortunately, and David Bordwell recently passed, his partner, Kristen Thompson, and then they brought in Jeff Smith. But the thing about this book is they give you about, I think I counted one time, about 1,700 1-inch black and white pictures. And you sign this book and the students expect to read it and learn concepts from a 1-inch picture over and over and over again. You need to be able to show them the concepts, the films, the clips. And if you can't do that, then you don't have I don't believe in this day and age you're teaching effectively, right? At the last time I checked in, they had only recently made 100 clips from all those. In our curriculum at City College, I made a clip for every single picture in the book. And that's what this database can do. Things that they haven't corrected in 5 editions. I emailed David and I said, gotta correct this. Because he didn't know what he was doing for 20 years in terms of that picture, right? This is from this film. It's not from that film. It's from another film. So this is what I'm talking about here. When we think about Africa, we're not just thinking about, Ousmane Sembène and Senegal. We're thinking about all these regions. Who are these people? How are they included? How are they represented? This is really important for film studies. And almost no one's talking about it. It's interesting. Overwhelmingly, we talk about, of course, American-centered things, but also Germany, right? Germany of the 20s, France of the 30s, what Impressionism, right? And then we have Japan and other modernist, kind of directors, Kurosawa. And these become these people who represent countries of entire film outputs. And no one's talking about, in terms of the business, how are these things being produced? Who's involved? What are these things? It's like gatekeepers, right? So how do we get beyond that, start taking control of our curriculum and start making or requesting, this is what I'm proposing to you, requesting clips on behalf of these ideals. So here we have things are getting better with, I think, with Kino and Lobster and Flicker Alley. There's these places that are restoring these films. But it's Oscar Michaud. It's the major producer of a Black-owned studio for Black audiences. It made a lot of films. No one even talks about him. Both of those books that I just mentioned, even the one I said was good, I don't even know if Michaud's mentioned. Things are getting better in terms of the pioneers of African-American cinema series or Blu-ray set that came out a few years ago, or maybe about 5 or 6 years ago. but it's like this stuff is just absent. And this is also Lois Weber, who I'm talking about, who I would argue is as important as Griffith. And so how do we do this? When people say to me, they go, well, I don't have these films. How am I going to get them? Wait, I'll help you. So what the database is, it's a way for all of us to collaborate. I'm going to monitor it and listen to everybody, but the whole idea is to get everybody on the same page. I have the films. If you're a subject expert or you're an expert in a certain region, a certain filmmaker, let me know. Say, I can't get the film, and I will provide it for you, or I will cut a clip for it. I can't provide films, entire films, obviously, because it's illegal, but I can provide clips, okay? So you have to let me know what you want. All the clips, like I said, are going to be subbed, AD accessible, and every page that I've created in the entire class, not class, database, is relevant to the language on the pages. So what I've tried to do in the limited amount of time in this last year, because things have been crazy, is to try to bring in scholars and cite them and say, look at this clip, this is important. So there's some kind of context. Like I said, the clips are downloadable, the pages are in Canvas Commons. You can import all of this stuff into your course, and you can do whatever you want. So my goal is to try to, build it so that eventually we have, just this great opportunity to share and collaborate. Where ultimately, the question about open source, right? Where we maybe don't have to have textbooks anymore, and we can take control of our own content and be able to talk that way. So let me. Oh, I think I hit. Oh, there we go here. So this is the database here. And what I've done is I've had a clip request form where anybody can ask for a film, a region, a year, a director. Has it ever been commercially released? Which is, you would think, oh, okay. But like I said, I have access to things that are sometimes 35 millimeter transfers, that I have friends that do things. Yeah. So if you're like, hey, I really want this film, no one's ever got. This has happened before. I was just talking to my friend at UC Santa Cruz. He said, I can't believe you have this film. No one's had this film. I said, well, it was on VHS in Mexico in like 1987. You got to sub it, but yeah. So all these things you can request, and I will do my best within the, I teach a 5-5-3 load. And for those of you at Research One, that's crazy. But I will do everything I can to try to get. Let's see here. But I wanted to show you just what a page looks like. And obviously I want this to be eventually a collaborative effort, because I don't know everything about anything. So here is a page. I have everything documented in terms of like what has been auto-translated, in terms of a description. I have the source material, things from everything. And then you can actually download the clip. It has captions. But this is a film about, people who are, this is a feminist, statement from 1966. It's like, when is this ever going to be in a film history textbook? Ever. It's never going to be.
Vous avez des régions entières, dans les Aurès, en Kabylie, dans le sud, dans le Loire-Nice, où les hommes de la population qui constituaient la population active ont été complètement décimés. Il reste des femmes.
Je connais des femmes, personnellement, ne demanderaient pas mieux que de sortir sans voile, et puis elles sont très, très potables physiquement, quoi. Elles peuvent se permettre.
Franchement, parce que le mari, quand il impose à sa femme de mettre le voile, c'est plutôt pour sa famille, pour les gens qu'il connaît. Il ne veut pas que les gens qu'il connaît voient sa femme. Il a l'impression de ne pas dominer la famille, quoi, de ne pas commander sa femme et toute la famille.
So even just like something like that is going to spark a lot of dialogue beyond, Godard's Breathless, which I'm a huge fan of. But how do we implement this resource, right, in Canvas that people don't even have to have institutions that subscribe to Studio and be able to share? And this is what I really want for this, is to be the kind of resource for the world, for everyone to come to and be able to request things and do it. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Now we have the pleasure of Kelly Metz-Matthews.
I feel like I should set expectations here. I will not be talking about any pastry wars. There will also not be any K-pop. I am a linguist. It doesn't get that exciting. Thank you also very much for having me here today. I'm Kelly Metz-Matthews. I'll be presenting my epic project, World Englishes in the Classroom, an internationalized space for speaking, listening, and language acquisition. How many of you knew that there are over 7,000 languages spoken in the world? Who knew that? Okay, a few of you. That's probably a serious underestimation, by the way. We recognize that's probably an underestimation, but language is changing. How many of you have teenagers? I do. I have 2. They use whole ranges of vocabulary that I do not know. Skibbity? I am not mom, I am bruh. We talked about this at breakfast. Language changes all the time. Languages come in contact with one another and they morph. They change, they go dormant, sometimes they go extinct. Something called linguicide, the extinction of languages, that's quite real. But also languages change for the good. And so I'm excited to talk to you maybe about some of the bad things today, but also some of the good. Did you know also that there are several hundred distinct varieties of English? Those of you who laughed because you have teenagers, you know. We have spoken some of those very varieties in here today. We probably speak dozens of them. We code switch between them. We use some in our homes. We use some at work. We use some in our countries of origin and elsewhere. Estimates suggest that approximately 1.5 billion people speak English. Does that surprise anybody? Most do not identify as first language speakers of English. That matters. It matters a lot, actually. But what does it all mean, right? It really means that a lot of people are learning English. If that many people speak English, but it was not the first language they acquired in the home, people are taking a lot of English classes, or they're immersing themselves in cultures and communities where English is the norm. Why are there so many speakers? I don't think any of you are surprised by some of the things that you're seeing here. Imperialism and colonialism, those tentacles are deep, right? The resulting coloniality, migration patterns change many languages, not just English. Globalization and what we sometimes now talk about as hyper-globalization. I'm pretty convinced we currently live in a zeitgeist of hyper-globalization. Thank you, Internet. And then, of course, the resulting narratives, those ideologies, but also the realities around English and other languages as being a means toward economic and social mobility. How many times have you heard someone say, I want to learn English because it will improve my job prospects? Probably all I see a lot of you shaking your heads. So my epic project attempts to reconcile some of those things. I teach English as a second language, and I have been concerned for a really long time about what that means. What are the ethical implications of that? Right? There are these really deleterious tentacles of English all over the world because of some not very good things. And here I am teaching English every single day. So how do we reconcile the deleterious aspects of a language like English, and English isn't the only one, but alongside the very positive realities of English for our students? My students feel and say all the time that English is a means of and towards social justice for them. It allows them to speak to their kids' teachers, to go out into the community, to get those jobs that they need, to integrate into whatever community they hope to integrate into. So I'm attempting to reconcile those things by redesigning a course that I've taught many times, intermediate, advanced, speaking and listening, essentially, or conversation. So conversation combines the two discrete language skills of speaking and listening to highlight some of the following things: global voices and Englishes, the many Englishes we speak, as being inherently valuable. I don't like the idea that there is just one standard American English and we should somehow all be speaking that. I'd like to highlight first and additional language speakers of English and other languages and highlight their many accents. How many of us in this room have no accent? Anybody have no accent? Just checking. Yeah. Trust your friendly linguist. We all have accents. There's no unaccented speech. You might carry a common accent within your community, but there is no unaccented speech. And so I want my students who are acquiring language to know that it is okay, that they, like the rest of us, have accents. And then, of course, along with this, I think it's important that we provide culturally and linguistically responsive content for our students. So what did the redesign process look like for me? Conversation courses tend to be thematically based, and this one is as well, so module based. I use Canvas as my LMS. I sought out compatible content, and by compatible, it had to then match with the theme, right? Also the level of my students, but then also these things that I wanted to highlight, the additional accents and speakers and languages and nationalities of the speakers of that content. I also designed activities for various modalities, not just online courses, but in-person courses. And then I field tested some of that in my own course, because it's really the best way to see what is and isn't working. So an inside look. These are the 7 modules that I designed as a part of this course. Chances are I'll add some modules to this in the future, but for right now, the full course exists at 7 modules. The first, because I like to start with the meta, is communication and language. The second theme, cultural difference and connections. The third, the great outdoors and geographic boundaries. As you imagine, I teach largely refugees, parolees, and asylees. They have a lot of things to say about geographic boundaries. Module 4, single stories, politics, and the news. Module 5, families and the food they share. I'm going to chat with you about that later. Module 6, understanding society through documentaries, which I just in my head call Documentary Month, everybody. Documentary Month. And our futures is the last module. So we move from the past into the future. Where did I find the content? A fair amount of the content I found in spaces that you might already know about. It's out there if you look for it. I use StoryCorps audio files, Voice of Witness content. Let me just plug Voice of Witness for a second. It's a phenomenal resource, not just if you're teaching English as an additional language, but any content area. And I especially love their oral storytelling project. TED Talks and TED Ed videos, my students already know those, so those are a good resource. I don't want entirely new content all the time. I want them to have things that they're familiar with. And then, of course, documentaries, right? But accessibility was important here, as my colleagues have mentioned, so I utilized OER resources, and then you would be surprised how many documentaries are actually offered by, for example, Netflix, openly to the public. So what Englishes did I include? A lot. I think of these Englishes as in 2 buckets, right? So I need in a conversation course to provide my students with content to talk about. We need fodder for conversation, right? So the first bucket of listening content really comes from countries where English functions as a common first or home language, not the only one, but a common one, an official language, or what we might refer to as a de facto lingua franca. Now, lingua franca as a term should probably be problematized. But here it's a good descriptor, and that would be a lingua franca in higher education, in business, in government, legal systems, and elsewhere. But those countries, those world Englishes are as follows: Australia, Canada, India, Jamaica, Nigeria, Pakistan, the Philippines, Singapore, the United Kingdom, and the United States. So that looks really different from what you would expect typically in an English as a second or additional language course, where you mostly hear speech that sounds exactly like mine, right? I also, as I mentioned, wanted to include additional language speakers of English. We don't all have the same accent. We're not all born in the same spot in the world. So listening content also came from speakers of English as an additional language from the following language groups: Mandarin, Chinese; Spanish, multiple varieties; Miztec, Estonian, Farsi, Arabic, Vietnamese, French, Marathi, and Urdu. A lot of Englishes. So let me just show you a couple of quick assignment examples so you can see the types of things that my students will actually be doing in this course. You can see that they have a lot of variety in the Englishes that they're exposed to in the course, but what type of things are they really doing? Well, they're watching, they're discussing, and they're sharing a lot. We're a non-credit institution at the San Diego College of Continuing Education. Often our students spend up to 15 hours a week with us in one course. So they have a lot of time to produce and practice language. I'm not going to get into each of one of these videos, but I wanted to give you an example of what 2 videos in one of my modules, these are from Module 4, look like. So you can see students have an opportunity to watch these short clips as many times as they like, and I encourage them to do so. Then I provide them with a discussion activity. So those are comprehension questions, right? Did they really understand it? Do they need to watch it again? Do they understand the overarching ideas? And then from that, I asked them to share. How would they connect this to their own lives? What does this look like for them? Did they like it? Did they not? Do they have some opinions? So here I want them to go a step further. And then you'll see the same thing. So the danger of a single story. How many of you have seen this wonderful talk? Yeah, wonderful talk. And another one, how to use family dinner to teach politics. Great conversation starter, by the way. I did field test this one. I did field test this. The thing I really love about this in particular is you don't actually have to talk about what your politics are to talk about whether you should talk about politics. No one is afraid to talk about whether they should or shouldn't. Documentary month is something I have done previously with students, but not in this internationalized context. And documentary month gives them an opportunity to dive deeper into content that is relevant for them and also provides them, again, an opportunity to hear English spoken in a variety of contexts and about a variety of different topics. I provide them with, I think, 21 or 22 at last count, options to view totally accessible documentaries and shorts, and then they get to discuss those things, recommend those things to their peers, and connect them to their own lives, all while being exposed to these different Englishes. And then finally, my favorite project is the oral history project, which I admittedly have taken in part from Voice of Witness, tried to give them some credit here. But I love the idea in the final module of moving from the past of our students into the future, of really seeing that as an arc or a bridge. And so what I've asked students to do in this final module as their final assignment is to construct some personal narratives by interviewing one another and other community members, so reaching beyond the walls of the classroom. They develop conversational strategies and skills this way. They do what we qualitative researchers know of as member checking. They don't know it's called member checking, but I do teach them to member check. And to request feedback on the narratives that they have written. Did they get it right? What things could they include that they didn't? What things did they miss? And then, because I think voice and choice is so important when providing culturally relevant material, they also select their delivery module or modality, which could include things like artifacts that they bring in to represent these community members or their peers, visual aids, auditory enhancements, or more. Really, it's up to them. The thing that I think is especially special about this assignment that I'm really excited to launch is that my one and only requirement, I don't like rubrics. We don't do a lot of rubrics in non-credit ESL. But my one requirement is, as a part of this narrative, they must teach us about something from that person's home language, so that they're tying that home and language back into their acquisition of English, right? But showing that that language has value too, whether they're teaching us a word, whether they're talking to us about what it was like to transition from a first to an additional language, whatever they're teaching us, as long as we're learning about that home language, I think we've won something. I think they've acquired English, but at the same time are walking away with the sense that those other languages have inherent value. So just to sum up, my goals with this project, as I mentioned earlier, were to include global voices and world Englishes as inherently valuable components of a language learning experience. That English is not, and one specific English in particular, that English is not the only language of value. That first and additional language speakers and accents should be included in the English language teaching context and English language learning context, and that culturally and linguistically relevant content could be really important to the delivery of a course. So those are the things that I hoped to attain, and hope you agree that I have. I think I have. I've tried. And I think moving forward, the two things that I would really like to do are to further this work in other courses that I teach. I thought I had been doing some of this, but this project highlighted for me quite how much work it was to make all of this content culturally and linguistically relevant. And, I'm a linguist. I do this for a living, and it was hard. It took a lot of time. And I'd also like to work with students to enhance not just this course, but future projects. I did this largely on my own with a bit of feedback from my students and through sort of participant observation, watching my students when I field tested some of these things. But what I would really like is to get their actual feedback, the direct feedback, so that I can make some improvements to the next course that I internationalize. And that, my friends, is it.
So our last speaker is Denise Maduli-Williams. Unfortunately, she can't be with us today because it's her son's graduation, but she was kind enough to share her project.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Denise Maduli-Williams, and I'm thrilled to be able to share with you my Stanford EPIC project. My presentation is titled, Where Accessibility Meets Global Education, Making Learning Matter for All. There's a small picture of me taken at Stanford during our orientation on this slide, and I am hoping that down below they have turned on the live captions. Please ask them to if they haven't had an opportunity to. Sometimes it is easier to follow along with a presentation when you can see a slide deck on your own device. So if you would like to take a moment to open my slide deck with this QR code, or type in tiny.cc/Madwell Stanford Deck. You can view the slide deck and follow along while I am presenting. 1 billion people worldwide have disabilities. 4.25 million Americans have disabilities. 1 in 10 undergraduates report having a disability. And students with disabilities make up 5% of the community college population. However, 63% of students do not report their disability to their colleges. This means that we do not even know which students in our classes have disabilities. These are some of the common disabilities: visual, hearing, motor, and cognitive. What this shows is that not all disabilities are visible. Some disabilities look like the ones at the top here. Others look just like this. Other disabilities look like me wearing reading glasses, or the fact that I am ending the semester per usual with carpal tunnel in one of my wrists. This is all super important as we work with our students and our global student population. Designing with usability, accessibility in mind gives all students the opportunity to learn more effectively, especially when we are working on globalizing and internationalizing the curriculum in our courses for a global student body. It needs to be accessible. Without that, we are not ensuring that all students can access our coursework. We know that this is not just important for students with disabilities. The perfect example of this is the curb cut effect. When this went into effect specifically to help people with disabilities and mobility challenges, perhaps in a wheelchair, perhaps using a walker, it opened it up for so many people. Perhaps someone traveling and having a cart, a luggage that they're rolling along. Perhaps a mom with a stroller. Perhaps someone carrying a lot of things. The curb cut helps everyone, not just someone with a disability. As we think about this in terms of our coursework, we often talk about this analogy with the blueberry in accessibility circles. And the idea is that you can't just add in the blueberries after you make your muffins. In the same way, you cannot just add in accessibility after you have made your course or created your curriculum. You have to bake them in, plan for, and embed accessibility from the start. But I actually like this analogy even better, that accessibility is not just like the blueberry, but it's like the flour in the muffin. It's woven into every aspect. It's core to the creation. Fundamentally, you can't create any muffin without flour. It's embedded in every bite. It melds to the other ingredients. It plays a supporting role. So all of these things came to my mind when I started thinking about my Stanford EPIC proposal. And this is what I proposed: an online toolkit for creating accessible learning environments with universal design for learning, or UDL, principles in online accessibility practices. So I did do just that. I created this online toolkit. I used Adobe Express webpage to create an accessible site, which is a digital toolkit to support anyone who's hoping to make sure that their curriculum and their coursework and their materials are accessible. Within the table of contents, you can see some of the things that I included. Those included the disability landscape in higher education. I think it's important to know where we stand and what the background is, especially in the California community colleges. The types of disabilities. Now, before I started really working with accessibility, I wrongly assumed that the students that I needed to serve, the largest number, were students with physical disabilities, whether that was hearing or visual or mobility. But it turns out when I did a deeper dive into my particular college, our Disability Service Center, the highest number of disabilities they serve is ADHD, autism, and neurodivergence. So that really made me rethink, how am I making sure that I'm using universal design for learning principles to support all of my students? So again, I included online learning design for accessibility resources for everyone, universal design for learning principles. I also included a section on AI and accessibility. AI is a very hot topic, and there are many ways that AI actually helps with this accessibility, and also some things that we need to watch out for with AI. And then resources. There's a lot of resources that I've included in my digital toolkit. So just a quick deeper dive into the section on online learning design for accessibility. Some of those components that were most important for me to included things like alt text, captions, descriptive text for links, headings and lists, and color contrast. Those are imperative for our online learning practices. In terms of universal design for learning principles, I included multiple methods of engagement, of representation, and of action and expression. A really important mantra within the accessibility community is nothing about us without us. So one of the things I am most proud of within this digital toolbox is the examples from students from the San Diego Community College District who have disabilities and who have thrived and succeeded, and how services and support and accessibility has really helped them. This is one example, Yuhan Liu, who has cerebral palsy. And as she said, it may take other students an hour to complete an assignment, but for me, it may take 3 or 4. Or another student who had other types of neurodivergence, who mentioned that thanks to the support of so many people, organizations, and institutions in the summer term, he was able to take 12 units with a 4.0 GPA. The other thing that I mention and address within my digital toolbox is the common disability microaggressions that occur in higher education, especially those due to ableism. And this is a tweet from quite some time ago by Dr. Christina Costa, who is a professor of psychology at the University of Michigan. And she tweeted, "I never tweet, so you know this is serious. I recently had a student apologize when explaining their accommodations. All I can think of is what systems and people made them feel like they had to be sorry to receive their right to accessible education." So keeping this in mind is something that I embedded in my digital toolbox. Another small example of a common disability microaggression in higher ed is microphones, and assuming that our teacher voice is acceptable or enough for any student who might need help with hearing. So for example, we might say things like, "Oh, I'm using my teacher voice. It's loud enough." But teacher voice is not an accessibility feature. Students should not have to ask for a microphone if needed in a presentation or in a large lecture hall or even in a large classroom. Shouting is not consistent. Microphones actually work kind of like a surround system where the voice is highlighted and everything else falls to the wayside. And using a microphone is an accessibility feature that we need to be aware of. I also talk about meeting students at the very beginning of the semester if they have a disability. And I want you to think for one moment that imagine you are a new student coming into your classroom and you have an accommodation letter. And how do they feel knowing that they need to find a way to approach you and being concerned about how you will accept them? So one of the things I offer in my digital toolbox is some examples of inclusive syllabi statements to add into the toolbox, or to add into your syllabi, to ensure that you're not just saying there is a disability service office, but that it's important to me that my course is accessible and that I want you to let me know if there's something that is not, and that I am eager to support you. So one of my favorite things about my digital toolbox is the examples of accessibility and universal design for learning from our current Stanford EPIC cohort. And there are many more examples on the toolbox than what I'm going to show right here. So I've just pulled out just a few, but I hope as you look at the toolbox, you'll see others from our cohort on there. So one of the examples here is from Dr. Daniella Graves, who in her course, which focused on global foodways and practices, had some examples of really great alt text so that students will be able to review and understand any images that she has within her course. She also had examples of really great grammatically correct captions. And I know that Kevin Sherman, in his vast database of early cinematic history of marginalized people, that he's got captions and follows UDL principles in all of his videos. It's not enough to just hope that YouTube heard us correctly and is ensuring that the captions are auto-corrected. We need to go in there and do that. And I want to point out just briefly that grammatically correct captions and closed captioning in general don't just help students with disabilities. They help, a young mother who's at home with her baby and needing to have the volume down while she's listening to your video lecture. They help an English language learner who is learning new vocabulary and listening to a lecture or presentation multiple times. In fact, research shows that almost all students believe that captions help them even if they do not have a disability. Descriptive text for links is really important. This is another example from Dr. Daniella Graves' class. In my project, I also have examples from Dr. Yunteng He on many amazing PowerPoints that he created on cultural elements in chemistry education. And those PowerPoints that are accessible are so important. This is not an example of his. You can see those on the digital toolbox. This is an example of what happened to me when I tried to use Gamma to create a PowerPoint. And when I created it with this AI tool, it ended up with 49 accessibility errors. And the time it would take me to correct all of those errors for accessibility would take longer than me just creating a slide deck from scratch. As we move into Universal Design for Learning, I had examples from Dr. Lauren Movius from her Global Media Studies class, where she had this amazing unit on K-pop that allowed students with neurodivergence and other disabilities to perceive and comprehend information in many different ways, whether that be audio or video or text. I also included examples from Dr. Kelly Metz-Matthews in her course on internationalizing second language communication. For example, students here have a choice in how they show their understanding of the learning of this TED Talk that she assigned to them. And one of our current Stanford board members, Dr. Dayamudra Dennehy, was a Stanford EPIC Fellow last year, and in her Humanizing ESL course, which included skills for the 21st century global workforce, she included digital portfolios for multiple means of ways for students to show their understanding and assessment of their learning. One last thing that I want to mention about my digital toolbox is that I did create a GPT using ChatGPT specific to accessibility. So you can use that by going in there and asking questions like, how can I make my website more accessible? How do I integrate alt text correctly? How can I include more inclusive language? I actually used my GPT for this presentation, and I asked the question, or I gave the prompt, I will be giving a presentation for the Stanford EPIC Symposium. What should I consider to ensure my presentation is accessible? And this GPT, Accessa Alley, gave me a lot of examples that I need to think of. Visual design, color contrast, font size and type, using live captions, simplifying text. So these are different ways that this tool can be used, and it is right there on my digital toolbox. I want to end with this quote, that we need to make every single thing accessible to every single person with a disability. And I will end with family. I like to start and end with family. On the left is my grandmother, Encarnacion Soriano, who died just shy of her 103rd birthday during COVID. And I just want us to think about, if I have the privilege, if we all have the privilege of living as long as my grandmother, we too one day will have a disability. So it might not be that important to us right now, but we all will have accessibility challenges at one point in our lives. And on the right is 4 years ago when I moved my son Miles into college in the middle of COVID, and he is the reason why I am not here right now. I am at his college commencement. So I'll end with just the QR code to the online accessibility digital toolbox that I created, along with ways to contact me. And I thank you for your time and attention. It has been truly a pleasure to be part of the Stanford EPIC cohort, and I hope we'll keep in touch. Thank you again to everyone who offered accessible examples for our project. Take care, everybody.
Thank you to our last speakers, and now we open up for questions. Yes.
This question is for Kelly. So I teach at San Joaquin Delta College in Stockton, California. And Stockton is considered to be one of the most, if not the most diverse community in the country. I have students living from all over the world. I have students from Syria and Saudi Arabia and Yemen and Pakistan and India and, Fiji and the Philippines and South America and Central America. And many of my students have become basically English interpreters for their parents or their grandparents. So I'm kind of fascinated about this linguistic aspect of translating from their parents or grandparents, and they grew up in another country and they're telling their stories, and just that linguistic aspect about it's their children that are basically interpreting their stories into English or Englishes, because we all know that English has basically absorbed all these different languages as well, all these different words now that in English that we think we know what they mean, but really they have a different connotation in the native language that their parents or grandparents spoke.
Thank you for sharing. Is this working? Can you all hear me? Oh, we think so? All right. Michael is telling me to get closer, and I should always listen to Michael. You're right. English has a massive effect on these other languages. And that was, I hope I got my point across in the beginning of my presentation with the deleterious effects of language contact, right? Language contact has some incredible effects. It is what gives us the slang that our young people have come up with today, at least in part. But it also, it has these deleterious effects, right? It is changing languages in ways that we hope it would not. It is affecting a loss of culture. You've probably, most of you at least, have heard someone say before that language is culture and culture is language. Right? And so that's so very important to our students. And I, like you, have many students, at least my students often have their children translating for them. So they're sometimes bringing the sheets I'm giving them home, and I'm getting handwritten notes from their 8-year-olds asking me to explain something. So it's really important that we talk about these things when we are serving such diverse populations. So thank you for that comment.
Thank you so much to all the presenters. I'm just in awe. I feel like I come every year I've been coming for who knows how many years, but I feel every time the bar is just raised higher and higher. So thank you to all of you. I wanted to start by saying who in the room knows what W in the chat is? I want that would be for all of you. If that's coming from my teenager, from my 18-year-old, he would just say W in the chat, which means winning. W's will go in the chat for I don't know, one of the rappers or something like that. But so yes, I really can relate to what you're talking about and the slang and how it's changing. I teach ESL at Mission College, so we are in the same discipline, but I'm also, and I'm just so happy to hear it, I'm a non-native English teacher, so I do have an accent, and I think a lot of times my students don't recognize it, and they say, your English is amazing, you don't have any accent, and I go, no, I do, and I'm not, and I'm fine with it, because the purpose of communication is that you're understood and that you have something interesting to say. And so I really appreciate your focus on just empowering students that having an accent, number one, and I tell them the same thing, that the people from Boston don't sound like people from Louisiana so we all have accents, but at the same time, students come to us and say, I want to speak without an accent. And so I feel like what I'm doing also is kind of my purpose is to help them acquire legible, coherent speech, but understand that it's important to come to terms with that an accent just represents your background and who you are. And I think that goes to like all of your presentations, and I really appreciate that through food, through understanding our histories, to understanding our the portrayal of what we see through the media, through film, that it's all basically, I feel like we're becoming so much more student-centered, and really like students can see the reflection of themselves, of their culture, of their language in the curriculum that we're teaching right now. So I'm so excited about everything you're saying. I want to have like an epic university where we would back to what the other member was saying, the participant was saying, or audience member was saying, that I just wish we would like really have a video, from every epic presenter in that in this epic university that would be free for all and have these amazing ideas. So I guess it's not really a question, just wanted to share my admiration. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Well, we're putting Kristen in charge of Epic University, everybody, by the way. She's one more time for Kristen. I just thank you so much, and I just want to comment in particular when you if English is not your first or home language, then your bilingualism and multilingualism should be framed really as a superpower. It means you speak multiple languages. And so if we frame accents as advantages, I think we're helping our students. So I hope we are able to get that across to more and more students.
Hey, I have the microphone. I know, Kelly. The question is actually for you. So I've been helping facilitate an equitable instruction workshop for a while now, and we had our first English cohort of instructors come through, and one of the biggest debates was how do we negotiate and balance the space between really that linguistic justice and kind of recognizing the need to decolonize English, while at the same time providing them with the necessary tools for instructors that might not be as understanding or equitable.
Yeah. I think that's a huge challenge for all of us right now, but I will say this, occasionally you hear from people, and you might have heard this, Jane, in conversations, that culturally and linguistically responsive pedagogies are not robust, and I will push back against that pretty hard. We can be culturally and linguistically responsive. We can talk about justice. We can give voice and choice to our students. We can provide them with options. We can do many of the things that Dr. Maduli-Williams also talked about, and still provide rigorous content, right? Like we can still provide the opportunities for learning. So I do think it is a challenge to make sure that we are preparing our students for faculty who may or may not be as flexible as we all are. But I think we're preparing them by giving them the content and empowering them and showing them that they actually can get through our courses, right? It is a challenge. I think we have a lot of education to do with our fellow faculty members. I think we have a lot of education to do in regards to asset ideologies versus deficit ideologies, but I think it can be done, Jane. So I don't have a how to do it reply for you, but I do think it can be done.
So my question is for you. Oh, sorry. My question is for you, Kevin. Obviously, you've created an incredible resource. Currently, it sounds like you're having to do a lot of personal work. So submissions are made. You're then connecting people with appropriate clips, soliciting experts, etc. At a certain point, if not already, that's going to go beyond what a single person can do. Do you have a vision for the future of how this will continue, even when it grows past your ability to be responsive like that?
Yeah. Right now, I think that I could probably do at least 5 clips a week on my own. But the goal is to try to at least get 3 people, ideally in different disciplines and subject experts. I still will probably cut the clips because I just, want to make sure everything's uniform and everything looks good. But yeah, I think that, I think ideally it's going to have to be something that I probably will have to give over to somebody at some point in my life. So that's the whole point. It's a collaborative thing.
It's so quiet in here.
This will be the last one, and then you can connect with the fellows during lunch.
Yeah, as a total film buff, I really want to commend you, Kevin, for what you're doing. Underrepresented films, underrepresented filmmakers, underrepresented countries, parts of the world that we have never seen, ways of making films, ways of photographing scenes, exposures, and all these things are so important. We all live in a visual culture, right? YouTube, Netflix, all of these channels make us watch so much content. And we forget about those, or we don't even know that there's so much underrepresented stuff out there. And I really, really thank you. The question is basically about access. How can I get your clips? Sorry.
It's available, or at least theoretically it should be. I'll work on it this weekend because I was having some problems with the home base. It should be through Commons, through Canvas Commons. So if your institution has a Canvas, account, just go to Commons, and I'll send something out that the Epic, team can send out as well. But just type in, I'm sorry, I should have made this clear. The cinematic history of underrepresented people, but then you also theoretically can type in Stanford film. I also put the word film in there, so you can type in film history latest, and it should pop up. If it doesn't, I will work on it, and it will be ready to go by tomorrow.
All right. Thank you so much to all our speakers.